Looking at the moonlit Madhupur River, you might expect calm. The water moves quietly, with thick fog rolling slowly over the banks. Yet, the residents of the nearby village absolutely refuse to look at the water after sundown. The locals live in fear of a specific, ironclad rule governing this stretch of water. At night, a single rowboat appears, steered by a woman with a veil obscuring half her face. If any living person steps onto her boat, they either vanish completely or they turn up dead. The curse is fast and it is lethal. When a young local couple, Mohit and Mohini, decided to test the waters late one night, Mohini boarded the boat for a ride. She woke up alone on the riverbank, only to discover that Mohit had been dragged to an isolated island and left completely lifeless. The village now exists in a state of total withdrawal. Maajhi's presence has effectively reclaimed the river, turning the water into a dead zone for anyone who calls the village home. That paralysis becomes a matter of life and death for a local writer named Ramesh. Late into the night, his wife Nirajini goes into premature labor, requiring immediate medical intervention to survive. This map of Madhupur illustrates the exact problem Ramesh faces. Ground transportation is non-existent at this hour, and roads are entirely blocked. To reach a doctor and midwife, Ramesh must take this single red path, cutting directly across the haunted water. Ramesh is forced to make a grim, terrifying calculation. He weighs the certain danger of childbirth complications at home against the likelihood of being killed by the ghost on the water. He chooses the water. Folklore is filled with spirits acting on unfinished business. Typically, the living try to interpret what the spirit actually wants to achieve peace. But interpreting a ghost's motive is a dangerous game, and things turn catastrophic when the living get the translation wrong. To understand the entity on the water, we have to look at her mortal life. The ghost was once a living woman named Maajhi. After her husband died of a sudden illness, Maajhi was left entirely destitute. To avoid starvation, she took over his ferry route. But the local ferry trade was entirely controlled by a syndicate of male boatmen, led by a man named Balbir. For them, a woman operating a boat was an ideological insult. They refused to allow her to participate in their economy. This flowchart tracks their economic sabotage. When Maajhi lowered prices, the syndicate formed a barrier, intercepting passengers. The blockade reaches a critical point when a man arrives carrying his dying brother. Maajhi offers a free ride, but the syndicate physically blocks him from her boat. Maajhi fought back to save the boy, but the syndicate responded with lethal force. They murdered Maajhi to ensure she could never threaten their monopoly. This murder transformed a desperate widow into a vengeful spirit. The haunting of the Madhupur River is the direct, violent residue of the syndicate's greed. Back in the present, Ramesh gently loads his agonizing wife into the wooden rowboat. The ghost of Maajhi sits opposite them, quietly pulling the oars in complete silence as they drift out into the center of the dark river. Suddenly, the water begins to churn. A cold wind rips the veil from Maajhi's face, exposing her terrifying features. Ramesh braces for the inevitable slaughter. But the attack never comes. Instead, Maajhi rows them quickly and safely to the opposite shore, allowing Ramesh to rush his wife to the medical care she desperately needs. Ramesh realizes exactly what happened. Maajhi's final, unfulfilled mortal wish was to ferry a dying patient across the water. By bringing his wife to the docks in a life-or-death emergency, Ramesh provided the exact scenario Maajhi needed to complete her task. When Ramesh returns with his healthy family, the village celebrates. They apply the standard redemption rule. Maajhi completed her interrupted good deed, her soul found peace, and the haunting is over. The village's declaration of peace emboldens the worst person possible. Balbir, the man who originally murdered Maajhi, greedily decides to return his own boat to the river at night, confident that the water is finally safe. He rows out toward the center of the river. Without warning, the ambient noise of the night goes completely silent. The water drops to a freezing temperature. Maajhi has not moved on. Her tattered wooden boat breaches the surface violently, manifesting directly in front of Balbir's bow. Before Balbir can react, Manjari exacts her vengeance. She pulls him and his entire boat straight down to the bottom of the riverbed. By sparing Ramesh, Manjari successfully baited her actual target. She used the family's safe passage to convince the syndicate the curse was lifted, specifically to lure Balbir back into her territory. This split-screen model maps out the two distinct mechanics driving ghost lore. On the left is the village's naive understanding of spirits, and on the right are the actual mechanics of supernatural vengeance. The ghost weaponized the illusion of peace rule. She used the appearance of redemption as a smokescreen to manipulate the living into a false sense of security. The blood-for-blood rule dictates the grim reality of the curse. A manufactured monster requires the destruction of its creator to finally achieve equilibrium. Horror folklore exists to serve a very specific sociological function. It provides a cultural fantasy where the marginalized can finally inflict inescapable consequences upon oppressors who are otherwise untouchable in the real world. Human society often tries to find comfortable stories of peaceful redemption. Folklore reminds us that true justice frequently demands the oppressors be devoured by the monsters they created.